Mhm.
Okay, so as a brief introduction, Dr. Ranu Jung is a professor and chair is the professor and chair of biomedical engineering, as well as the Wallace H. Coulter Eminent Scholars Chair in Biomedical Engineering. Her research interests lie in neural engineering, computational neuroscience, and sensory motor integration, and she is currently developing neural technologies for functional restoration in individuals with limb loss or spinal cord injuries. And she is the head of the Adaptive Neurosystems Laboratory at Florida International University in the Department of Biomedical Engineering. So Dr. Jung, so to begin, could you tell me briefly about your scientific and technical background, as well as what you've accomplished and what your work is about?
Yeah, thank you, first of all, very much for giving me this opportunity to interview with you and to contribute to the Society of Women Engineers Initiative. I am a member of the Society of Women Engineers and have been for maybe 30 years or so. I got my undergraduate degree in electronics and communications engineering. And while I was an undergraduate student, I found out that I could combine my love of medicine and taking care of human health with engineering through a new field called biomedical engineering. So that is why then I went on to do further education and got my master's and PhD degrees in biomedical engineering from Case Western Reserve University. And I did my undergraduate in India at the National Institute of Technology, Warangal. And so after that, I was an NIH postdoctoral fellow and had an opportunity to do work in neuroscience. And so this whole combination of engineering, neuroscience, math, all of that put together forms my passion for neuroengineering and computational neuroscience and experimental neuroscience, and specifically using all of this knowledge base to first learn about the living system. How does the brain, spinal cord, how do they control movement? What happens with sensation? And then to develop technologies that might be available to restore lost function that may have been lost because of perhaps trauma or because of some other neurological disability. So that kind of wraps up the whole area of work that I do.
Okay, so how did you, okay, you already explained how you got into your field in the first place. So as a child, like what kind of, when you were growing up, like as a high school and as a middle school student, what kind of, were you always interested in science? What led you to choose this career path in the first place?
I think perhaps the thing that would define something most about me is curiosity. And I think perhaps when I was in, I can still remember that I was, I think, 5th grade, where I actually got admonished for asking too many whys. Why are you, why is it this way? Why is it that way? And etc. But that curiosity of finding out information of how things work, what is it that is in us, what is happening in nature, that is what drove my curiosity. So from very early on, I was interested in understanding both the living system. I remember loving the dissections that we had an opportunity to do on frogs, and understanding how the blood flows and what is happening with the heart. So things like that. And at the same time, I had this fascination with basically technology itself. My father was an engineer, my mother was an English teacher, but I lived in a city where a new city that had been put in place as part of India's new revolution after independence, and a whole industrial city was being put together. So very much so, science and engineering and math and medicine all were tied in together, and that's what drove me to follow through. So in high school I did something called biomath. So I was in a group of students that studied both biology and mathematics and physics and chemistry. Whereas there were some who only did the biology path and some who only did the math part, but we did both. So I had a tough time deciding whether I wanted to go into medicine or wanted to go into engineering, but it was this curiosity about living systems that stayed with me, and then that's what helped me put together things.
Okay. And what do you believe is the most important action that needs to be taken in order to improve representation of women in the field of engineering as well as STEM in general?
I think that one of the things that we need to do is very early on, when it even starts in elementary school, is to make sure that we do not, we give young girls and little girls the opportunity to ask, to be curious, to use their, to physically do things with objects, to be able to participate in active learning processes. And that is, it can be that active learning and curiosity and communication about math and science can happen even in a kitchen, about the chemistry of what it is all about without even talking about it like that, right? Or even on a nature walk of what do you smell, how do you smell things, what happens, why are you smelling things? There's some things, you know, that there are particles that get to your nose, and then you smell things and things, you know, you recognize things. So I think early on, making sure that the girls' curiosity is being nurtured and channeled is very important. And then at all times, not saying that this is, oh, you cannot do this or you can do this, but giving them the confidence of being, of having their approach of doing things being valued for that. I think that's very important early on. And then as time goes on, giving them the confidence that while they may be in different structures in society, and while they may bear certain biological realities of life, that should not be reasons to hinder them from reaching their passion, and giving them the confidence to dream and dream big, and know that as a society, we will be there to support the whole of society, and women are not to be the invisible part of that society.
Okay, great. Okay, what projects do you currently have ongoing in your lab? And could you talk more about their direct social impact, their direct societal impact?
Sure. One of the biggest projects that we have is to restore the sense of touch or sense of hand grasping to somebody who has lost their hand. So when we reach out and touch something, our brain controls the muscles. We go, our hands open or close, and we grasp something, and we touch and we feel, and that sensation goes right back. But if you lose your hand, then you might still be able to use your residual muscles to control a prosthesis, but current commercial prostheses in particular don't have any sensors in them. And so there's no real way to give sensation back except for the person to see what they're doing. So one of the things we have done is to say, could we then tap into the existing left nerves that are still functional above the level of the amputation, and then electrically stimulate them with the electrical stimulation that's tied to sensory information that is coming from prosthetic hands as the person is using them. So in this context, it's a responsive stimulation and in a real world environment. So this is one of the major projects we are doing. It brings together this whole world of prosthesis. It brings together a whole world of neurostimulation, so the electrical engineering part. It brings together all of the parts about neuroscience of how is it that we get percepts. We also look at, it is a wireless communication, so it is putting things inside. So it's a medical device situation. And so this ultimately would allow people to become, to start to think about their prosthetic hands, not just as tools, but as part of them. And that would improve body image, less likely for them to discard their prosthesis because it embodies into their own body image. So it will help all of those people who have an acquired limb loss. The other thing is, because it's a neurostimulator we have designed, what we have actually is a way to stimulate nerves in a very focused manner inside the nerves. So this medical device that is the future for it could be used for stimulating many different kinds of nerves that innervate different organs in the body. And if things are not working okay, we could use electrical stimulation in a focused manner to activate the nerves in order to control the different organs in the body. And so it's a platform technology that could have a very broad impact in the bioelectronic medicine sector. One other project we are doing is coming up with advanced algorithms to help somebody who has insufficient respiratory capability to give them electrical stimulation to get appropriate level of ventilation. So for example, if somebody has a partial spinal cord injury at the cervical level, they are not able to breathe sufficiently, then sometimes what is done is they do a pacing of the diaphragm. So rather than just, of course you have mechanical ventilation, which would be in a really bad situation, but in other cases they have pacing. But right now, the way that pacing is done is only with a fixed stimulation level. So if you were to, things were to change, if you were doing some activity, that pacing level doesn't change. So someone has to go in and would have to actually physically change the parameters of the stimulation. So it's like a pacemaker that is responsive in the case of like a heart, if you were stimulating the heart. So here we have come up with some closed loop algorithms to allow us to develop an automated way of first fitting the system, and second, automatically as your metabolic state changes, to change your pacing so that your respiratory rate and the depth of your breathing would change on the fly, and you would be able to get adequate ventilation all through. So we've done those, we are developing those systems, we are doing some computational testing, we are doing some tests in preclinical models, and ultimately we want to get them into human subjects. The previous project that I talked to you about, that actually we are in a clinical trial of that investigational device, and one person has already had that implant for 30 months. So we are much further along in that one. The respiratory pacing one is early. So these are two examples. There are other studies going on, but these are two major ones.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that really extensive answer. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is that you're not only a research scientist, you also do some like entrepreneurship kind of work. So I see you have, multiple patents, and you're also on the boards of some biotech companies. I was wondering, did you receive any training in entrepreneurship in addition to your STEM training? And like, what is it like to balance responsibilities as both a researcher and an entrepreneur? So if you could talk about like the relationship between those two things, it would be great.
Yeah, so I didn't get any formal training to be an entrepreneur. So I think entrepreneurship partly comes through innovation, and then when you come up with something new or you have some innovative ideas, then especially in the case of biomedical engineering, what we would like to do is to be able to translate them out from the lab into the clinic or to actually help people. But in order to do that, and in order to do that pathway of moving it, one way that would happen is that either you yourself may have to form a small company to commercialize it, or maybe there are other companies that might license your innovation in order to be able to, or may take your innovation to commercialize it. But usually when they want to do that, they would like to know that they have the ability to work in a so-called protected space to commercialize, and that's what patents offer. So part of filing a patent is to create a safe space in which you could take the risk of bringing it to market without having a competition that would sink you very early on, if I may say it in that particular manner. So partly what we are doing, and when we are funded, especially by the federal government, it is a responsibility for the investigator to protect the innovation in such a way that it would do the public, it will have public good, especially since federal grants are taxpayer funded. So how would you ensure that? One way is to file a patent, make sure it is protected, and then either you yourself would commercialize it, or you would hope that some other companies might license your patents, and then they would commercialize it. So the whole idea is that you translate the effort from inside your lab to the clinic. And in our case, when we are doing our technology development, et cetera, in biomedical, we first look at what is the unmet need of the community, of people, for some disease, trauma, and where is a gap for a technology solution. And then you come up with a technology solution. So you go from so-called clinic to lab to clinic in that particular pathway. So this process, this really what got me doing it is saying, I want to be able to take what I'm developing, and when I say I, it's not I alone, right? It is the students, it's the postdoctoral fellows, it is other research scientists, it's a whole ecosystem and a group, a team. Our collaborative team is developing, we want to get it out. And so that meant that that gets us to file patents to make sure that we have got that patent portfolio in place. And in some cases, we have formed some companies. I had formed a company in very specifically in response to my initial company in response to a need from the US Army for a particular kind of technology or project that they were looking for. So that's what has kind of driven me.
Okay, so one of the fields of work that I've seen you that I saw that you do is regarding brain plasticity in premature babies. So I was curious, how is brain plasticity different in children born prematurely than in children born, during the normal time frame?
So I think you are referring to the study that is actually done by my collaborator, and I am her collaborator to some extent, Dr. Melissa Peralt, who has looked at the role of bilingualism in children born premature. So if it is, what she studied is a group of children who may have been born premature and were monolingual, or a group of children who were born premature and then were bilingual, and how did they do in their executive functioning later in life. And what they found is that the children who were born premature and were bilingual were doing better on many of the executive function tasks. And so the idea really is that the brain, as we understand it, it's actually not fixed even as an adult. It is continuously learning, and we now know that there is a lot of neuroplasticity, and there is, it's kind of like use it or lose it to some extent, or like when you have muscle activity that you do and you can grow your muscle, it's not just a stays fixed. But there are times during your development and younger age or later age where there might be windows of opportunity that this neuroplasticity may be more accessible or more more moldable to external inputs. And so it's not 100% clear what exactly that bilingualism may or may not be doing at that point. And we've tried to look at some, look at also activity in the brain using FNIRS for children later in life, but who were born premature and then did this bilingual, but were bilingual. So it is something, perhaps it is the complexity of the use of different parts of the brain when you are bilingual versus you are monolingual, and how you might be putting different aspects of attention and the language processing, all of that together, that promotes overall activity in the brain to get better. I personally am not sure exactly how that might happen, and I'm not sure everybody really understands how this might happen. But what Dr. Peralt is finding is that there is better executive function later. We know that you can promote neuroplasticity, for example, after spinal cord injury. If you have an incomplete spinal cord injury, you have some spinal circuitry left over. You can do things like treadmill training, and you do, so it's just repetitive rehab therapy that can promote neuroplasticity. We can do that also with electrical stimulation. So if you do electrical stimulation based movement therapy, and then that itself can help improve the central nervous circuits to be modified. Some of it is that these exercise-based approaches, whether they are through neurostimulation or through treadmill therapy, those in combination change some of the neural parameters within the brain and the spinal cord, the neurotransmitters. They are upregulated, downregulated, and it probably goes down all the way to the gene level, that things are upregulated and downregulated, and all of that then helps in either keeping some aspects of the nervous system that were present from deteriorating, or perhaps strengthening some of the connections that were already there. And that more and more data is showing that we can mold the central nervous system through many different ways.
Okay, so yeah, so one thing that we have an article about on our platform is brain-computer interfacing, and the work that you described sounds somewhat similar to brain-computer interfacing. Do you work with brain-computer interfacing, and like how is your work, like how similar is your work to that field?
So when people talk about brain-computer interfacing, what they're looking at is primarily saying you have recording some activity from the brain, using that to control something on the computer. And now that computer may be connected to something else. What I talk about for our work, we are indirectly doing that aspect, but it is more of a man-machine interface that we are doing rather than a brain-computer interface. But what is a computer, right? So when we are talking about, for example, an amputee controlling a myoelectric prosthetic hand, and we are tapping into the nervous system of that person, and then you are doing some processing of those signals, and those are controlling motors in a prosthetic hand. You can think of it, that computer is that processing unit that is sitting in the prosthetic hand itself. So it's the brain. When you talk about BCI, usually when people talk about BCI, they think about EEG connected to the scalp, or even now electrodes that are directly connected to the brain. But the pathways are many, so you have got that, and down through the spinal cord to the peripheral nerves. And when you record from the peripheral nerves, you're recording activity that has been processed at the spinal cord and maybe coming from the brain, both of those together. So yes, there are many different ways you can connect to external devices. That device may be just a computer screen, or it might be a hardware that is effectively a computer, which your smartphone is a computer, and that is controlling something else. So there can be a direct link, or there can be different parts to it. So in that sense, we work in a BCI model, but my lab is not directly recording activity from brain activity to control something, or in that particular format. And brain-computer interfaces actually don't say that they are only outgoing, they can also be ingoing. So again, in our case, as I mentioned earlier, we are stimulating the peripheral nerves, and that's the pathway with which we are going into the brain ultimately, because the percept of sensation is created by the person in the brain. Whether you tap to it directly by directly stimulating, a region of the brain, or you may stimulate portion of the spinal cord that communicates to the brain, or in our case, we stimulate the peripheral nerves that go to the spinal cord, then goes to the brain.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Jung, for obliging to this interview with us. It's really a pleasure to meet you and to get to talk to you. I also hope you have a wonderful day, and I wish you the best of luck in the rest of your career.
Thank you very much, Saraswati. Can I ask you, are you finishing up high school, and what are you planning to do?
Yeah, so I'm actually in 12th grade, and I'm in the process of applying to colleges, and I plan on majoring in biomedical engineering. But yeah, it's been a pleasure. Yeah, well, thank you so much for obliging to this. I'll send you the video when it's done and when it's uploaded to the platform, and I'll also send you a link to the platform, so maybe you can check it out or something. Yeah, yes. Thank you.